that that kind of transitions to what I was going to ask, and that's just you use Fidelity. Is that what you would make as your non-professional? That's what you enjoy using.
Yeah.
Not that you would recommend other people to use that, but
hmm Yeah, I'm obviously super into this stuff, but I chose Fidelity because if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I would say they're probably I would say them and Schwab are probably the two I would put at the top, way better than Raymond James, Edward Jones, Merrill Lynch. I would put those two at the very top, and they also charge typically much lower fees than those other brokerage services do. So if I got hit by a bus tomorrow and Shelby wanted to have an advisor, she would have access to somebody that I would trust and would wouldn't be opposed to letting them manage our portfolios. So Fidelity was the one that I chose for that reason. I started out at Vanguard and used them for a long time, but their website's pretty archaic, and they don't allow fractional shares. So if you want to buy, if you want to spend $2,000 of something, you have to find what is the exact number of shares if it's not their product that I have to buy, and so it just doesn't work out very neat sometimes. So
yeah, that makes
so
sense.
Fidelity is what I went with. Robinhood is super easy to use. I had an account there for some time. I had I wanted to try all of the brokerage services. So at one point, I probably had 8 different non-retirement brokerage accounts. Yeah, total freak.
That's funny.
And I consolidated all of them into Fidelity. That was one of my goals for last year, was to make this thing as easy as possible for somebody to pick up and run with. Because usually most households have a nerd and somebody who's much more passive about the stuff. Very rarely do you see a couple. Sometimes it's the woman, sometimes it's the man. I don't think there's always like a gender role in the finance side of things.
Yeah,
And to me, you should make it easier for your partner to pick up. And if you've got 34 different accounts all over the place, they don't know what the passwords are. You've got tons of investments that are hard to understand. Like they're not going to do that. So you have to think about, I think you have to think about legacy and how easy is this to manage, and could it sustain itself if no one logged into it for a year? And mine absolutely could. If you didn't touch it for a decade, it'd be fine. Small side note, Fidelity actually did a study, and they found that the accounts that performed the best were actually dead people's. So, it was people that were deceased. Those people performed best because they left it alone, and so that's
really playing the long game,
the long game. Yep.
the
Yep.
longest, even.
Yep.
That's funny. What what got you so interested in finance, just in general?
Yeah, I think it's for me it's the freedom and the safety that I feel like wealth provides. It's nothing about like you're never going to see me driving a $100,000 car or anything like that, or have a super nice house or anything, because I feel like all that stuff's all of that is immaterial, and the expression "you can't take it with you," I think that is true. I think when you're dead, you're done, and I think all your stuff is just other stuff. That's just stuff that people have to deal with, basically.
Yeah,
And so money for me is just strictly a freedom and options thing. Always has been. Yeah. So it's not necessarily about accumulating the biggest pile I can get. It's just getting to a point to where I don't have to work and you don't have to think about money anymore. Not
yeah,
living frivolously, but just if you want to spend money on a vacation, you don't have to think about that anymore. You just do it. So
yeah.
that's to me that's what it's always been about.
And then when you got started, or if someone was like, "Hey, Logan, how do I start?" What is there a direction you would point them in, or is there resources you would tell them they probably should look into?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would encourage people to do your own research and due diligence. Don't just listen to me. All of the stuff, all of the knowledge that I've accumulated has been over many years of my own research, and I think if you applied it, you'd do fine. But I think you should also understand why I would recommend certain things. But the biggest kind of overarching piece of advice that I would give people, and this relates to everything, even powerlifting, is focus on one thing at a time. I think a big mistake that I see people make, and this relates to investing because they are People are trying to pay off student loans. They're trying to save for a house. They're trying to buy a car. They're trying to fund retirement. They have so many different goals that you're not going to do any of them particularly well. So I think before you really get started investing, I would encourage having minimal liabilities, as little debt as possible. Have a good emergency fund, and if you're going to save for a house, get that process started, and then start moving into investing. Because I think people they try to do all of those things at the same time, and it doesn't really work that well. So we had a really good financial footing. Thanks in large, I can't take all the credit for that. I didn't have student loans. I had a full scholarship, but Shelby had a family that was able to pay her way through. So we got off to a really good start that way. But I would encourage people to contribute to a 401k if you have one of those through your employer. At least do up to the match. So if you contribute 5% and they give you 5%, absolutely do that, because you're just missing free money. And then over and beyond that, I would do a Roth IRA. So people hear Roth, what does that really mean? So there's two types of IRAs. An IRA is an individual retirement account. So that is completely separate from your employer. It has nothing to do with your employer. The limits that the IRS mandates for your 401k, how much you can contribute to it, does not apply to the IRA. So they're two totally separate things. And the traditional IRA can also be called a tax deferred. And so what that means is you put money in today. If it's through your employer, a traditional 401k, you get a tax break on that because the money goes in prior to being taxed, which reduces your taxable income, which reduces the taxes you pay today. A Roth differs in that the money is after tax. So after you get your check from your company, it arrives into your checking account, and that money you fund your Roth IRA with. You don't get any sort of tax break from it in that moment, but all of the money grows in the Roth IRA tax-free. So the idea is that if you anticipate being in a lower tax bracket in retirement, it probably makes more sense to do the traditional today while your income is higher, and then when you take the money out of that traditional IRA, it is going to be taxed. The Roth, the money comes out tax-free.
Right.
So if you think you'll be in a higher tax bracket later, it makes more sense to do that.
Yeah.
So the Roth IRA is what I would recommend, and that's just you can think about that as the vehicle. That's not actually what you invest in. So there are ETFs, mutual funds, stocks, all those different things that you can invest in, and I encourage people to pick just a couple of them. Big common mistake I see with people is they have 42 different holdings in an account, and it's needlessly complicated. So I would focus on just a couple of core positions. The three that I recommend are VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund. So an index fund just tracks the underlying index. So in this case, the S&P 500. So that's a collection of 500 of the biggest publicly traded U.S. companies, and they're market cap weighted. So what that means is if you look at a stock and they're trading at $100 a share and there's 1 million shares outstanding, you multiply those two things together, that gives you the market capitalization. So if you take a company like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, these trillion-dollar businesses, that is just a representation of their market cap. So the S&P 500 weights them. So those big technology companies are a big chunk of the S&P, kind of at the very top. So when you invest $10,000 in, if the stock represents 2% of that index, you can think about your $10,000 being spread according to the percentages within the index itself. So the S&P, yeah, perfect. So VOO, people refer to it as VOO. That is an S&P 500 ETF. So
Yeah,
that would be the first one that I would suggest. And then SCHD is the other one. That's the Schwab U.S. Dividend Equity ETF. So this is a collection of about 100 stocks, and I like it to complement the S&P 500 because it invests in businesses that are there. You can think of Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Lockheed Martin. They're kind of boring businesses. People refer to this one sometimes as the boomer. boomer stocks. so so they're more dividend. Obviously, the name dividend equity, it's allocated towards these dividend focused stocks, and it historically it hasn't done as well in the last couple of years because it's light in technology, and that's really what has driven the market. But I think this is a really good way to diversify away from some of those big technology companies and put money in other businesses that might be a little bit more attractively valued. And the other thing that I really like about this one in that space, I'm a dividend growth investor. That's kind of what I would consider myself. And this fund has averaged about a 12% year-over-year dividend growth rate. So what that means is if you had 10,000 shares of SCHD and it pays you $50,000 a year in income, year over year, if you didn't reinvest the dividend, so you're taking the cash to spend, pay your bills, SCHD has reliably grown that income by about 12% year over year. So you're obviously staying well ahead of inflation. And again, it's kind of a hedge against those big technology companies underperforming. Growth, the growth stocks, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, all of these businesses there hasn't really been a period in time since the dot-com boom where that part of the market has outperformed as significantly as it has. And so I think diversifying away from that again has been helpful. In 2022, for example, when those technologies when those stocks led the way down, a fund like SCHD was only down about 2%.
Yeah.
So those two, and then lastly would be AVUV, the Avantis U.S. Small Cap Value ETF. So this invests in small cap stocks. So the market capitalization, I don't remember the exact, where the billions of dollar breakdown is, but you can think of these as small companies, and the value represents businesses that maybe are at attractive valuations compared to where they should be trading at. So these are small companies that are attractively priced, and then this particular fund employs some other more complicated metrics that try to capture those companies that are also screened for profitability. So small cap stocks I've heard people refer to them sometimes as gas station sushi. you end up with some turds in the bunch, and so you want to screen that tries to capture those that have good financial health, and a fund like this does that. And small cap value, if you go back 100 years, has way outperformed large cap growth. So we've had this situation in the last decade where large cap growth has outperformed like it never has before, and small cap value has underperformed like it never has before. And I would say this part of the stock market is probably the most attractively valued today. So we're pivoted towards this part of the market a little heavier than I would suggest most, but it can tend to be a little bit more volatile because of the type of companies that this represents, small cap stocks.
Right.
So AVUV is the one that I would suggest there, and I like a 40-40-20 ratio. So if I was going to invest $1,000 a month or $5,000, whatever the amount is, I would just come up with the 40-40-20 split on those three. And I think that would be a really solid approach. And I think if you did that for 30 years, I think you would probably have over $1 million if you maxed the Roth and did that. Yeah.
That's a pretty good deal.